we was talking about getting back on course with the Philadelphia James Harden talk. It pertains to Chicago always in some case, but for sure in this case, because the talks was if there was any team that's a dark horse to get James Harden, it has to be the Bulls. You can trade DeMar DeRozan and get James Harden, and that can work. Let's be serious. I'm not necessarily a fan of that at all. I can see why they may want to move because it betters the Bulls from the fact that James Harden is diverse from playing on and off the ball. He's more of an on-the-ball person, but I think he has shown that he's willing to be more of a point guard and score when necessary this past season, with like he did with Philadelphia, because he not only scored 20 plus points a game, but he averaged 11 assists and became the league leader in assists. So he can play that pick and roll combination and be a point guard per se and facilitator at a top tier level. That's possible, and that's what the Bulls need: a solid offense, a solid point guard that can facilitate, but also have the ability to shoot the ball when necessary. So putting him with Zach and Vooch, not a bad lineup. That's not bad, especially when you got Kobe White coming off the bench. I mean, that's a good look. But it makes no sense for Philly because DeMar DeRozan is a mid-range guy, and Joel Embiid is a perimeter shooter as well. So they're going to clash, especially if you talk about that pick and roll option. I think the only way that if that was ever to happen is what Tyrese Maxey is going to do at that point guard position. He's going to have to really balance that out because we know what his skill set is. He can score. He can shoot. He's still learning that point guard position and facilitating for others, but the dude's a scoring machine. We know that. And he knows how to play off the ball as well. But by James Harden leaving, you're giving the keys to Tyrese Maxey saying, you're the full-time point guard, go to work. So I don't know how that would mesh with DeMar DeRozan and Joel Embiid in the same court at the same time. So it doesn't make sense to me. But Mike, why is it that the Bulls are in these? Why is it that their names are being brought up in these trade rumors for James Harden? Like, why does this make sense at all?
Yes, so I feel again, I always hate prefacing my points with I don't think I'm gonna blow your mind here, but I feel like people have discussed this to some extent, maybe not as strongly as others. I'm not sure if Casey Johnson has talked about it as much because I feel like he's a guy I definitely expect to be, like I said, when it comes to actually having information on the Bulls in terms of insiders, we know the big guys. Almost no one, in my actual opinion, is like getting info from the Bulls besides Casey Johnson. That's why I tell people, respect everyone's opinion, but when he says something, listen, because even if it's biased and you're like, this seems like he's trying to shade something positively from the Bulls, it's probably the Bulls trying to shade something positively for the Bulls. So it's still worth listening. And I haven't heard him talk, I don't believe, about Harden and DeRozan off the court relationship in terms of them knowing each other much. So you said, I think, what I've seen most Bulls fans always pretty much say here, which is the Bulls trading DeMar DeRozan for Harden because he's expiring deal. Obviously, they want a star, blah, blah, blah. It can work out. But you bring up the most obvious point, which is there's no reason for Philadelphia to do that because you're not getting younger. You're kind of keeping the same age gap. And you also love the 3-point shooting and the playmaking, and you're getting the playmaking, but you're completely losing that 3-point aspect. And you're giving a guy who, on top of taking your team's entire 3-point rate down, which DeRozan is saving this Bulls team. So I'm not knocking him, but I'm saying when he is like one of your big stars, you see he's a massive high usage player, and he doesn't take threes. So as a result, your whole team is usually not going to take a lot of threes unless you build your team the right way. And the Bulls didn't last year. And that's why we saw them not taking enough threes. So DeRozan, as great as he is, if you don't build the rest of the team around him well, he can hurt your team in some ways. Although I will say for the most part, he is a positive. But I think what Bulls fans need to be thinking about here more, at least mentally preparing themselves for, I don't think it'll happen, but more about the idea of Zach LaVine being traded for James Harden. I think some people, just because when you think about DeRozan for Harden, you naturally also say, well, maybe LaVine, but you go back to DeRozan because Bulls fans, you either like LaVine more, or you just say, obviously, we would keep the younger guy, or obviously, you keep the guy who makes more money. But you forget, my point earlier was that both GMs and everything have to feel like they're winning the deal. And for the Bulls, as much as people will hate to say, like, hear this, getting off of Zach LaVine, the amount of money that he will be owed over the rest of that deal, and bringing in someone who makes less, even if it was slightly less or comparable, or somehow slashing overall team payroll and keeping the team competitive. I think in the minds of the Bulls as a franchise, that's a massive win for them, even if fans were furious over the fact that they were emotionally attached to Zach LaVine and personally don't like James Harden after all of his antics. But I think the main point I want to get here too is Bulls fans should just think about this, because I don't think DeRozan's going to have any input. He's not that kind of guy. I don't think he personally cares whether or not the Bulls trade Zach LaVine, and I don't mean that in a disrespectful way. I just mean DeRozan isn't demanding anybody from the Bulls be traded, I don't think. And if anyone from the Bulls gets traded, DeRozan's not crying about it. He's a professional and has just understood that this is how the league goes. So he's going to show up and do his job regardless. But that being said, guys are obviously going to want to play with guys they like, and they know that's just how the NBA works. Now more than ever, we know that. The fact that the only other team I've really heard connected to Damian Lillard is the Brooklyn Nets, and apparently it's because Mikal Bridges is good friends with Damian Lillard. So this stuff matters a ton, as much as we want to make fun of it. And my favorite article to refer back to is from USA Today. I believe it was a Rockets Wire article from their Houston Rockets website. It's from 2018, and it was Harden and DeRozan have known each other since their childhood days growing up in Los Angeles County, California. And it goes on to basically talk about the Rockets playing the Spurs and DeRozan, being unhappy about initially being traded from Toronto to San Antonio, how Harden was doing with Houston and them both growing up in the Los Angeles area. But what I found interesting is there's a quote from DeRozan from 2018. DeMar said of James Harden, "I consider him family. We talk a lot. We have the same circle of friends. To see today where I am today, we always talk about it. It's definitely amazing to see how far we have come when we thought we wouldn't have anything." So, I mean, I think just the most important part is just that beginning part. I consider him family. We have the same circle of friends. They grew up in the Los Angeles area. These guys know each other. These guys, we don't see Harden and DeRozan hanging out every weekend, but they have a mutual respect and aren't just one-time friends. These guys have known each other since they were literally teenagers, and growing up in the same area obviously is going to bond you and have a lot more of an impact than even just the basketball stuff. So I think the DeRozan Harden relationship, the fact that those two players may get along and be more willing to sacrifice, parts of their game to make the combination work. I think that's something that Bulls fans are underrating a little bit. Obviously, James Harden has his flaws, but if you do a James Harden for Zach LaVine swap, Bulls fans can hate it all they want. It is a very clear path to it working out pretty well for both teams. Again, everyone hates Harden. I get it. He's a meme. You can feel however you want. The guy led the league in assists. We as much as we don't like him sometimes, we know what James Harden can do. Defensively is where it's more important. He obviously used to have a much worse reputation. Now it's somewhere in the middle. He's not a great defender. He's not someone you're worried about his defense, but we've always known James Harden to be a great switch defender. I do think that's something the Bulls don't have a big element of on their team, or at least you don't see them execute it great. I think it would be interesting to see with DeRozan, who I think of as quite a weak defender in many aspects, having someone like Harden, who you're maybe can switch, matchups on the fly, switch pick and rolls. You don't have as many post up bigs. So depending on the lineup, if you can switch everything on the floor, you can neutralize a lot of teams. Zach LaVine and James Harden, I don't really want to have a conversation about comparing their defense, but I think everyone would agree Harden's the obviously better switch defender and probably the better team defender between the two of them, just because of how long he's been in the NBA. So I think there's a very clear path to James Harden being the point guard that Bulls fans have been wanting for a long time. You get rid of Zach LaVine's shot creation, but you're opening up more shot attempts for Vooch and DeRozan, and you have James Harden, a guy who's going to set the table for those two. If your role players like Ayo and Kobe White and guys are stepping up as they get older, again, it's a very clear path to sing a Bulls team with James Harden, DeRozan, and Vucevic being a very good team in a year where the East doesn't look very deep after you get past the top 5 teams. I think as it stands right now, the current Bulls are probably like a 7 seed. But I think if you had James Harden for Zach LaVine on this team, you're talking about a team that could conceivably be a 5 seed, a 6 seed. They could very much avoid the play-in because I just think, regardless of how people feels, I think James Harden does give you a little bit more of a playmaking 3-point shooting look. He encourages the rest of the team to take more open threes because he's going to be finding guys in the corner. I think a year of James Harden might make Ayo Dosunmu go back to that rookie year 3-point shooting we saw where he was knocking down everything. So as great as Zach LaVine is, we know his strength isn't setting the table for guys. So I do think there's a path where bringing DeRozan in, bringing Harden in for LaVine would work out all right for the Bulls. I will admit, I think that works out much better for the Sixers because I think Zach LaVine gives you all of that dynamic scoring that you want from Harden. And while he doesn't have the playmaking chops, maybe you give him more possession in Philadelphia and try to make Zach LaVine into a Harden clone, basically. Try to just get him to buy more into being a playmaker, in return getting more shot attempts, maybe. So I just think there's a world where we know Zach LaVine and Zach LaVine and Joel Embiid and Nick Nurse would be interesting, and that would be a much better future for them than what they have right now. And for the Bulls, you're pretty much banking on this team made the playoffs and lost 4-2, lost 4-1, and it was pretty much the biggest accomplishment they've had in like the past 3 years. So getting James Harden in the building, a guy who, as much as we joke about him, has had some playoff success at least, if we're comparing him to Zach LaVine with all due respect, I do think there's a world where that could work out. So I think the reason we should pay attention to that one more also is those Zach LaVine trade whispers at the beginning of the offseason didn't come out of nowhere. And I do think the New York Knicks were more interested than people thought. And I do think the Knicks and Bulls probably talked more than people thought. And I think the Bulls are really scared about those last years of the LaVine deal, if his knee's going to hold up. Obviously, no one knows more about LaVine's health than the Bulls. And I think they also think of it as long-term. Getting James Harden gives you the ability to pivot because we all know Jerry Reinsdorf, he will blow up a team once he thinks it's over. And getting James Harden in the door makes it a little bit easier for the Bulls to do that because if a Harden, DeRozan, Vucevic team doesn't work in 2 years, you can get rid of all of those guys and start over from scratch. So I think people should pay attention to the Bulls a lot as these Harden rumors heats up. Although I will admit that I do honestly think he ends up in Los Angeles with the Clippers.
That's an interesting point, especially we talk about the Bulls not necessarily trading DeMar DeRozan, but trading Zach for James Harden. That's a very interesting point that, like you said, is not being discussed as often. But it wouldn't surprise me if they were to do that. So, very interesting take on that. But we can obviously stay with the Bulls since we're on this topic. We all know that the Bulls made some offseason moves. They brought in homegrown talent, Maywood, 708, Javon Carter, to a 3-year deal. They re-signed, and they did in a lot of ways do what they said they was going to do. They got him a point guard because they know Lonzo Ball's situation is they expected him to be out for the rest for this upcoming season. We announced that at draft night. They drafted Julian Phillips to replace Derrick Jones Jr. for the most part. Once Derrick Jones announced that he's not coming back. And then you bring in guys like Torrey Craig. You resign Kobe White and you resign Ayo Dosunmu. You've pretty much brought back everybody except for those few additions here and there. And you signed some two-way contracts that can fill up your roster spots where you got 18 players on a roster. But the Bulls did what they said they're going to do, especially when you talk about re-signing Vooch as well to the 3-year deal that he got. But along with all the re-signings, they brought in a couple new additions. Give us your thoughts as far as the moves the Bulls have made. And you already mentioned that this is the 7th seed. Ideally, you could see this team currently constructed being the 7th seed. Is there a chance that the Bulls can potentially pass that, or do you think it actually can get worse than a projected 7th seed in your opinion?
Yeah, so basically, as far as the free agency, the offseason moves, I liked it. It wasn't very exciting. In terms of those exciting moves, something like trading for James Harden, I think is pretty much as big as you can dream when you're talking about a guy who's not giving the team a lot of options. And we all know from following the Bulls for a while here, that's not sort of their MO when it comes to making deals. It's going to be those smaller around the margins moves, and it's going to be a lot of re-signing and bringing back your own guys and finding ways to try to actually, let me rephrase that, because I almost said to try to lose deals on the margins, but the Bulls don't try to, I don't think, but they always end up sort of losing deals on the margins in terms of overpaying guys slightly, giving a player option instead of a team option. But as much as people complain about it, I understand that's the nature of the business when players might not want to come to your team, or when you're negotiating with a team that might have more money than you. These are just the things you have to do, and that's just the nature of the business. So with all of that being said, I loved the offseason. And, people can say I'm overselling it, but similar to Will Gottlieb from CHGO Sports, I think, it's not his exact words, paraphrasing here, but being excited about what they did within the realms of what you expected. And if you didn't expect them to do a lot, bringing in Jevon Carter really was the move that shocked me. Torrey Craig, I can expect. It felt like, again, I always want a guy to get paid. Obviously, I understand we don't want a team to lose negotiations or overpay when you don't need to, but overpaying a couple $100,000 or $1 million for Torrey Craig doesn't bother me. He's going to be a great 3-and-D role player. We know exactly what he's going to bring to the table. When you think about how often Billy Donovan likes playing small, Torrey Craig will probably step directly into that Derrick Jones role of playing the small ball center against teams that don't really have an actual center or play small, like the Warriors, obviously, with Draymond there. So I think that Torrey Craig was a solid addition, but Jevon Carter is the big one because he's coming from a winning culture. The winning culture stuff is always, been a little bit overrated to me, but it's more so just when people say that, I don't think they're getting it like the point, which is just the player is serious about the sport, as crazy as that sounds. DeMar DeRozan himself said, there's a lot of guys in the NBA who don't love basketball. They love being millionaires and they're extremely talented. And Jevon Carter, whether or not it's true, it seems like he's a guy who genuinely loves basketball and wants to get better. And the reason I believe that is because the Bucks are a much, 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 much better team than the Chicago Bulls. The reason Jevon Carter comes to the Chicago Bulls, I believe, is because he saw an opportunity to, metaphorically speaking here, spread his wings and actually get a chance to show that he's capable of being a starting talent in this league. And if not a starting talent, at least someone who's playing high minutes and helping a team make the playoffs and not just being a role player, being a massive contributor. But I say that starting talent part because that's important. Jevon Carter obviously did solid in his spot starts with Milwaukee, but we all know sort of the pecking order there. And because they weren't going to play super small, Jevon Carter was always going to be that backup to Drew Holiday in their current iteration. In Chicago, I think I could be wrong here. I am like 90% sure Jevon Carter will start. Will start for the Bulls. Mostly because, one, if you look at the players Billy Donovan likes, he just fits into everything Billy Donovan likes about a player. Really the same things that made him like Patrick Beverley.
Yeah.
And he's a veteran. We all love Kobe, and he's becoming a veteran at this point in his own way. But Carter is just going to have more experience and know-how when it comes to postseason play, and I think Billy Donovan is going to want that. And the Bulls have been pretty open about thinking Kobe White has six-man potential. I think someone, not Billy Donovan, was on the record saying they think Kobe Man could be a six-man of the year one day. And I think the Bulls buy into that. So I think all the writing is on the wall that Jevon Carter is going to be starting point guard. I think the only big question for the lineup starting wise is Torrey Craig going to continue to push Patrick Williams into that backup unit, or is Patrick sort of finally going to be unquestionably the starter? But I love the moves just because, everyone gets swept up in the Bulls because nationally, either they don't get talked about at all, or when they do get talked about, the team is terrible and there's not much in-depth analysis besides Zach LaVine isn't a winning player, which we're all tired of hearing at this point. I know. So the facts matter. So just hitting the facts real quick. Last season, the team was 24th in offensive rating. The fact that they weren't great at offense and didn't shoot a lot of threes is why they had to try to come from behind in so many games. The defense was top 5. The Bulls are a defensive team, and that's why I like their offseason. The Bulls have felt directionless to me since they sort of put this big three together once Lonzo went down. And now it feels like they're finally committing to, we are a defense-first team. and we're going to try to scrap by with enough points because we know we have three guys who are just literally there to create offense in Vucevic, DeRozan, and Levine. These guys score. That's what they do. And we're going to build an infrastructure around them that is an elite defensive team. I think Billy Donovan doesn't get enough credit because no one on paper thinks of last year's team as great defensively on paper. But again, you talk about a top 5 defensive rating. So when you add in Javon Carter and Torrey Craig, 2 excellent defenders, to a team that was already top 5 in defense, the writing is on the wall that you could see that being a great combination. You could literally have the possibility of being the Bulls being the best defense in the league. Again, no one nationally wants to hear that, but the numbers are the numbers. They could be number 1 in offensive rating, or excuse me, in defensive rating next year with the units they can throw out there. I think an underrated story that's not talked about is Javon Carter and Alex Caruso could actually play together in close lineups when Billy Donovan likes to go small, and you get 2 hellacious defenders on the perimeter that gives the Bulls a completely different look if you throw those 2 out there with Levine or those 2 with DeRozan. So I think defensively, the Bulls are going to be hell for teams. NBA teams scout at a way higher level, obviously, than NBA fans. So it's not going to be news to them that the Bulls are great at defense. They're prepared for this. But having Javon Carter and Caruso really makes the Bulls, I think, a serious threat. That's why I think they're a 7 seed. The defense is going to be so good, in my opinion. The offense might be the same, which isn't great. But I just think regardless of if the offense improves or not, the defense will be good enough to carry them. Hopefully Patrick Williams and Kobe White get a little bit better offensively, and that can help you as well. Julian Phillips, I'm not expecting much, but I do think he'll get some run, getting to guard some really good perimeter guys just for the experience in the regular season. 7 seed is what I have this team pegged as, just looking at the shakeup of the East. I think talent-wise, they're much better than the 7 seed, but I think we all know the Bulls love to lose some games that they shouldn't. To teams that are rebuilding or just much younger than them. So I think you can always factor that in a little bit. So with that being said, I think they'll actually be the 7 seed and fall to the 8 seed after the play-in tournament. But I do think the Bulls will make the playoffs again. And who knows what happens once you get to the postseason. Health will decide a lot of that. If Vucevic's role changes on offense in terms of getting more post-up touches, will determine a lot of that. And Kobe White, if he gets more touches, will determine a lot of that. But ultimately, I think they'll be the 7 seed. And when they get into that play-in tournament, I think they'll lose the 7-8 game to the 8 seed, just because we know in the East, they can get a sneaky matchup. Let's say they play Atlanta, Trae Young goes off, and Atlanta goes up to the 7 seed. I think the Bulls will fall to the 8 seed, and then they'll beat the team, whoever they have to play in the 9-10 game, just because I don't think 9-10 in the East is going to be very good at all. You're talking about teams like Charlotte, Orlando, who ironically give the Bulls trouble. But you're talking about young teams, so I think if the Bulls have one game where they have to beat them, they can do it. So I think the Bulls will be a 7 seed, lose a game in the play-in tournament, but ultimately still make the postseason.
Man, I hope you're right. I really hope you're right because I agree with you. I do like the fact that they were able to get Javon Carter, not just because of his defensive intensity. He reminds me a lot of Patrick Beverley, which, Chicago kids got that dog in them, and on both ends of the floor, which I do like. But I also like the fact that Javon Carter, at least in the limited role that he played during in Milwaukee, he was shooting 40% from 3. Same with Torrey. Craig, he played a vital role in the Phoenix Suns offense, or in their lineup at least, but he's a knockdown 3-point shooter. He was shooting close to 40% from 3 as well. So even though the additions didn't boost the Bulls into championship expectations, which we as fans should hold this team to that standard, they should be championship, or bust every season because of the standard that was put in place originally. But if we want to talk about slight improvements from what the Bulls were going to try and do, they technically did that. And they did it well. And because of that, hopefully they improve from this year, instead of being the AC that you're trying to struggle to claw your way in, to actually getting into a tournament, into the playoffs, and hopefully getting to a point where you don't have to necessarily be in the play-in tournament. I'm not saying they're going to be top 5, but even just getting that 6 seed, that keeps you away. You know what I mean? So I wouldn't be surprised if they were to get that 6 seed to go to the playoffs if all the dominoes
Yeah, I was
follow
gonna say I'm glad you brought up the potentially getting the 6th seed and avoiding the play-in altogether, because the Bulls, they've kind of cornered themselves to where they don't have like a huge ceiling, but they also don't have like a super low floor. They're just sort of stuck in the middle. And that's why fans are so unhappy. It doesn't seem like the team is choosing a direction. But I do think a best case scenario, like if everything goes great for them, they would get that 6th seed and avoid the play-in tournament and maybe even win a round in the playoffs, like actually make it to the second round. But which, I mean, obviously conference finals, we should be dreaming bigger here, but baby steps. I think the Bulls could win a round in the playoffs, which at this point would be a big deal. I wanted to touch on really quickly the 3-point stuff, because I actually wrote that down. I looked at that. I love that you brought up Javon Carter shot 40% from 3 last year. If you look at simple as who the Bulls sort of had go out and come in, 3-point attempt rate, or if you just look at, raw 3-point attempts, Derrick Jones Jr. and Javonte Green are the guys who are out. Neither one of them were high volume 3-point shooting guys. They were okay in spurts, but neither one of them were guys you would think of as 3-point shooters. There were slashers who were undersized forwards. Javon Carter, last year he shot 42% from 3, as you touched on. Torrey Craig shot 39% from 3 last season. And so you're adding those guys to a Bulls team who I had wrote down here. The Bulls were last in the NBA, dead last in 3-point attempts. The Pelicans were 29th, and they shot 30.1 threes a game. The Bulls were the only team in the NBA to shoot under 33-point attempts a night. So obviously 1 3 a game isn't a huge deal there, but my whole point is being the only team in the league to shoot under 33s just shows the Bulls are just playing an antiquated style of ball. So the fact that regardless of how much money they were willing to spend, they address the obvious elephant in the room is you need to bring in guys who are going to be unafraid to knock down the 3-point shot. That's a big deal, because when you look at that offensive rating, the Bulls had a 112 offensive rating last year, 24th in the league. And I told you their defense was 111, 5th in the league, 5th best in the league defensively. So if you take that 5th best in the league defensively, and let's say Javon Carter and Torrey Craig, literally they both do slightly worse versions of what they did last year. They both shoot 38% from 3. Even that alone, if the Bulls offense is able to jump from 24th to somewhere in that 16 to 11 range, you could potentially be talking about the Bulls as, one of the, like you said, 5 or 6 best teams in the East, which is crazy to think of when you think of how bad this team looked in long stretches of last season. So I think it's being undersold how big of a difference those 2 role players will make, just because people aren't realizing Billy Donovan is going to run those guys out there a lot, based off of his personnel and how he cares about defense more than anything.
Yeah, man, we'll see what happens with the Bulls in the Windy City as we prepared to go through the 2023-2024 season.